Welcome to Catholic Views. In the studio with me today, I have Dr. Chris Burgwald.
Surprise!
Surprise! It's like you never left.
It's like I never. It's like a bad movie.
It kind of is. So today, Chris, we are going to talk about, this is a topic that you had mentioned a while ago, and I noted down. Then I came back to it, and I was like, what is this?
And I had another, when you came to me and said, hey, what do you want to talk about? And I had another topic, and you said, oh, what about this, though?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
everybody's like, well, what's the topic, for heaven's sake? Okay. So we're going to talk about how to think well, right?
Yes,
Or
ma'am.
what is thinking well? Because
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
completely confused about what thinking well means.
I'm not surprised,
Probably
Renee.
because I was going to say probably because I never do it.
I mean, you just sort of opened yourself up
I
for that
did,
one.
I did.
But I'm
I
glad
walked right
you
into
walked
it.
you walked right through it, and rather than
I
letting
did.
me.
I did. So you haven't introduced yourself on our show for a while. I mean, you're on all the time. So
Yes.
because
Pretty
now
much
your
every
title has
show.
changed a little bit. Yeah, but your title has changed a
Yeah.
little bit, and
Yeah.
we haven't really talked about that. So
That's true.
tell us about you, Dr. Chris Burgwald.
Well, it's born.
Okay, maybe not that far
It was
back.
a Sunday. It was a
Sunday.
Sunday. I am the director of Discipleship Formation with the Diocese, which was part of the realignment of our office,
Right.
which I think has been discussed in Catholic
Maybe a
Views.
little bit, yeah.
Last fall when our
Bishop Tornado
colleague
came through.
No,
Oh, that's true. That wasn't the
our
bishop.
colleague and friend Emily Leadham passed away. I mean, switched offices.
Wow.
But
Sorry,
she
Emily.
died. Emily had been the director of Marriage, Family, and Respect Life,
Right.
and she took the position of executive director for Catholic Family Services. And both Bishop Gerd and Father Scott Traynor, who's our boss as the vicar for lay and clergy formation, said, "Hey, let's take this opportunity to think outside the box.
Realign,
Is there
yeah.
a better way to realign the gifts and passions that Chris and Eric Gallagher have with the needs of the diocese?" And so I've for 18 years, just over 18 years, I've been the director of adult stuff, discipleship, evangelization, faith formation, variety of titles, that same work. But now I'm the director of Discipleship Formation. So I like to think I'm the I'm the point person for content creation and curation. You like that
Ooh.
alliteration?
Like you
Content creation and curation.
I kind of feel like you should be in our department then.
What?
Communications.
That's Well, evangelization in a way is the work of
Yeah,
communications.
well, our two departments work very closely together.
Yes, yes.
Because it kind of makes sense.
It kind of
and
makes
that
sense.
realignment really fits better with the bishop's vision
Yep.
for the diocese, which is
What? I don't. What?
this thing you've never heard
Lifelong
of, right?
Catholic missionary discipleship through God's love, I think maybe is what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're very much taking a team approach.
Yeah.
So I'm not the one responsible for. I'm the point person
Right.
for the creation of content, in other words, resources for formation as a missionary
Right.
disciple, or for its curation. You know what a curator is, Renee?
Yeah, someone who collects things.
Exactly. So like, especially museum,
Mm-hmm.
that's the one who collects, oh, this is what we should have. And let's put this out now. And so I'm the point person. So what do we need for the different resources? And resources, I don't mean like studies or books or videos. It can also be events
Right.
that we do
Right.
or that we recommend. So resources in a very broad sense.
Right. That's a good explanation of that, because I've been kind of wondering myself, like, what exactly are you doing
What does
over there?
Burgwald do down the hall?
Besides coming up with funny bits on biblical bites.
Right. Very funny bits. And
Very
biblical
funny.
bites.
Train wrecky type bits. Okay, so let's move on to our topic, thinking well. So the first thing that you kind of suggested, first place we go, is what does it mean to think?
Yes.
Which seems like this should be easy to answer. But when you said that, I was like, I suddenly can't think. I don't know. So tell me, Chris, what does it mean to think?
So
No, I'm not on admission. I'm not answering that question.
No, I know, but this will be very helpful.
Okay.
So I'm
I'll
not.
play.
Yeah. That's a great question, and I'm sure that.
Now people are like,
what does it mean to think? So how would you've been able to think about this question for a few hours at least?
about 24 hours.
What do you think, no pun intended, it
Well,
means...
I would use like pondering something, but that's
Sure.
to me, ponder, think is like the same thing. Like review all the facts. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know how to define that.
So I think part of the
Where's my dictionary?
not the problem, but the challenge is thinking can mean a whole variety of things. I don't remember what word you did you just say ponder?
Ponder, yeah.
Ponder, muse, reflect. Usually it implies some awareness that I'm doing, but it doesn't. If so, a lot of kids have recently finished school in here in South Dakota, so they had finals, right? So you're thinking, right? You're mentally working on something.
Trying to pull those algebra equations up,
right? Trying to remember the facts, the history thing, or whatever. So it's using your intellect towards some purpose. But it can be very self-reflective, pondering, musing. It can be more of just trying to pass the final test in history for the year, so I can move on. Right.
Using your intellect seemed like a very obvious answer that I didn't think of myself.
Right. Well, and again, like that. Well, what does that mean? Well, it depends on
what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So, anything else you want to say about that?
No.
Okay.
No.
So when you say think well, how to think well.
Yes.
That puts another spin on it.
It does.
Yeah.
So I
because let me say, the other day I walked over to your office in my little apparently my walking motion here if you're watching the video to ask you about this, and your door was closed, you were busy, so I asked Audrey Anderson, who is over there at your office, to see if she knew what you meant by it. So I'd be curious to see if what she said is what you say.
Yep. So I think another way to, and now every time I say the word think in this episode, I'm like, no pun intended. To think means to engage my mind with reality.
Okay.
So to think well, so maybe this will give you, does that give you a hint actually on?
I don't know.
No. Okay. So to think well means to actually engage with reality as it is.
Oh, okay.
So to mentally or intellectually engage with reality as it is.
Okay. Not as you want it to be.
Correct. So thinking well. So I don't. Just this is maybe an everyday example, which and some philosophers out there might nitpick, but there's very few of them listening right now.
I was gonna say, probably not.
So I don't need
today.
it. So when I take a test and I do poorly, I get an F or even a C. Right?
Then you're thinking
I
bad.
didn't think well because I wasn't engaging with reality.
Okay.
To the fullness.
Okay.
Right. So if I'm thinking, and I'm really curious to hear what Audrey told you, but I'm giving my answer first, which I'm almost certain is different from what Audrey and I
Well, I was
talked about
hoping
before.
that you already kind of taught her.
Well, she and I have
thinking
talked,
well.
but it's been a while.
Okay.
So to think well means to intellectually engage with reality well. It means to, I think more specifically, to reason well. Mm-hmm. So if I'm making an argument in sort of the logical sense, not like yelling and screaming like you do to me all the time, but
Obviously.
more of where as I always do, persuade you why I'm right and you're wrong about the style.
And I always agree.
Of our let's not go down that. So reasoning well is about making one way to define that is making a good argument.
Okay.
So if I'm thinking well, I'm engaging with reality as it is. But another way to look at it would be I'm making a good case for my position. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes. You've actually taught Audrey well. That was basically her take on it, was how to use your reason to formulate a good argument. And she said some other things which I don't want to give away because you'll probably talk about those. So
let me give you an example.
Okay.
I go outside in the morning, and there's moisture on my driveway or on the grass.
Okay.
Oh, it must have rained last night. Mm-hmm. Could have been dew.
Right.
My sprinklers could have gone off. Mm-hmm. Just because there's water on the ground doesn't mean that came from the sky, right?
Right.
The other night in Sioux Falls, it rained.
Mm-hmm.
Is my ground wet after it rains, Renee?
Well, right after it rains, maybe.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So the reasoning there is it rains and the ground's wet. Okay.
Right.
Then, the ground's wet, so it must have rained. No, that's actually a logical fallacy.
Okay.
And I'm not going to get. We're not going to get into
Yeah.
all the. There's
Yeah.
Latin terms for.
I've always
all
wondered
the
what
fallacies.
that means exactly, but
Yeah,
I'm not as smart as I
we're
look,
not gonna-
apparently.
So that's an example of where we're avoiding a train wreck in this episode. Remember,
I know.
that's what we're trying to
It's
do.
difficult to do that.
That's an example of poor reasoning.
Right.
That's illogical. No, reasoning well, thinking well is more than just thinking logically, but it includes thinking logically.
Right.
If you're thinking illogically, you're not thinking well.
Okay, right. That should make sense.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
So where does this all come from? I understand it's from some really smart guys from way back when.
Right. So people have been thinking about thinking
Right.
for thousands of years. So usually it's philosophers who are, but not just philosophers, but they're the ones who think about thinking. So you go back to people, so Socrates in particular.
Oh,
So
sure.
the ancient Greek, this goes way, even before, because I know sort of your questions to me when we were prepping
Mm-hmm.
this episode, thinking of maybe St. Augustine or St. Thomas Aquinas,
Right.
who were brilliant thinkers.
Right.
They thought well. They engaged mentally with reality
Mm-hmm.
incredibly well. There's other things that I want to talk about, but I'll stick with this train of thought
Okay.
for now. But good thinking goes back way before Christianity, and specifically, people look to the ancient Greek philosophers like Socrates and his student Plato and his student Aristotle, or as some people call him Socrates.
No, they don't.
Oh,
You're not thinking well.
Bill
If you call him
does.
Socrates.
And Ted, but
Right, you're
anyway.
right. I forgot about that.
So yeah, Socrates. So Socrates. So Socratic Logic. Peter Kraft is a philosopher,
right.
well-known Catholic author who wrote a book on Socratic logic. So Socrates was one of those, but the ancient Greeks did the hard work of sort of thinking about thinking, especially thinking about logic and defining some of those poor arguments, those logical fallacies.
Right. So Aquinas and Augustine didn't really talk about those things, but they used them.
They
well.
used them, and both of them to varying degrees. Because they were theologians in a particular way, they focused more on theology, but they talked about thinking. They thought about thinking
Right.
themselves too.
Right. Okay. So I don't know which order to put these in. So you tell me.
All right.
Is it easier to talk about the steps of thinking well, like how to do this, or why it matters first?
Let's go with why it matters,
Okay.
because if I'm going to worry about the steps, I want to know why am I
That's a good
gonna
point.
bother doing this to begin with. Renee, why do you think it matters to think well? Do you have a guess?
Well, because if you don't, you're like, let's say you're having a conversation with someone and they're talking to you about faith or they're asking you questions. If you're not like ready for that to kind of have a conversation with them, you probably won't do more harm than good, but you probably aren't going to help them either.
Right. So, and I think it was actually
Maybe
one of
that's too deep of a.
No. I think it was one of the early episodes of Biblical Bites, actually. I'm pretty sure it's actually from the last Easter season, because I was looking over sort of the topics from those episodes. The apostles and the disciples early on made arguments for the faith. Peter testified to them with many other arguments
Right.
in Acts of the Apostles. He made a case for. And if you're going to make a case, you have to think well.
Right.
Like, you should really become Christian because blah.
If you don't have some logical arguments in
Right.
there, or
something
even if it's not logical arguments, just some basis in
Right.
why.
correct,
Yeah.
then that's not going to be compelling.
Right. Just because I said so probably isn't going to do it.
Because I said so.
Because you won't go to heaven if you don't.
That's an argument.
It is, but it's not a very good one if you have nothing to back it up with.
Right. So can you make a case
Yeah.
for, so we're called by our faith, we're called in a particular way by our bishop right now to be missionary disciples. To be a missionary disciple does mean being prepared to talk about our faith.
Right.
St. Peter in 1 Peter 3:15 said, always be prepared to make an account, a defense for the hope that is in you.
Right.
So to make a case for your Christian faith in a way that's going to be compelling to somebody else.
Right.
It's not like, well, I'm Christian. Why? And if I said, well, and basically, I prefer it. It's my preference. Well, that's great.
I always have been.
Right. Yeah. That's okay. Great. So I like pepperoni pizza too. I mean, does that mean that's my personal preference? Right. We're not talking about personal preference here. To be a missionary disciple means, again, to engage with reality in our intellect, all of our being as a missionary disciple, but thinking, well, I want to be able to make a case for why you should become a Christian,
right,
or a Catholic, or a better Christian, or a better Catholic.
Yeah. Okay, good. So if we're going to talk about the steps, or at least how to think well, I know one of them, and I think this is where you would maybe start, would be making sure, like if you're having a conversation with someone, is to define your terms.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah,
I know that one for sure. That's something I've actually been working on lately with people who maybe I disagree with, because I've found that if you do not agree on what your terms mean, you're just talking like around each other. And so
this is actually, I'm glad you brought this up, because you could really say, in a sense, that's actually how to dialogue or argue well. So even back, so it's very important. So even back for me to define the terms for my own sake. When I use this word, so I do this to you all the time.
Yes,
Brady, what do you mean by that?
Yep.
And you're usually, well, duh. No, I know.
Wow.
Right, but I mean, I know. That's not true. That's really not true. People do that to me, but it's funny how often, like, questions that I ask people, and then they throw it at me, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me to have thought through myself, what do I mean when I use this term? Let alone, what do you mean? Because in order for us to have a conversation to define our terms, I have to understood my own sense of what it means.
And let me guess, you do that by thinking well.
Yes. Well, to be honest, in this sense, I mean, just to think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not really I guess you could think about it poorly, but if you're defining, this is what I mean by it.
Right. Okay, so do you have some, like, is there some sort of way to think well? Are there resources? Is there? So
I
especially when it comes to faith, I suppose. We are on a Catholic radio station.
We are on a Catholic. So Peter Kraft and Father Ronald DeSelli have a book called the Handbook of Catholic Apologetics.
Okay.
And in there they have a little section on faith and reason, and then in that chapter, actually, they have a discussion of reasoning well, and really does focus. So I'm going to kind of narrow it to logic. Okay. So I think maybe one way is to and you can Google around, just like, what is logic, and how do you just do a little bit of study on logic? Now, logic can get really complex really quickly.
Yes.
And, there's Latin terms and fallacies. You don't need to go that deep, but I think if you just do some research in that. But Father DeSelli and Peter Kraft's book is really an excellent resource. There's also, this is going to be really bad radio right now. I'm just going to warn you.
Okay.
I think I got it. Father Robert, it's like, I can't remember
really
for sure
radio.
the title or the author, which is just awful. Father Robert, I think it's McTeague,
okay.
McTiegue. Google it. He's a Jesuit, SJ. And I think it's called Philosophy for Real People.
Okay.
It's a fantastic book.
So it doesn't go right over your head, which philosophy usually does.
It does, right. Yeah. So it's a great book, or a great resource. But to be honest, especially if you're in the Diocese of Sioux Falls, but if anybody wants to, I'm going to give my email address out.
Okay.
So if somebody wants to figure how do you reason well, email me, and I'm happy to give you like online more resources.
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't want to just start rattling off website addresses. We'll go to http:/.
Bad radio.
C. Burgwald at sfcatholic.org. CBURGWALD at sfcatholic.org. Yeah. And I'd be happy to give you all sorts of resources. But those Handbook for Christian or Catholic Apologetics, and again, I think it's Philosophy for Real People, something like that. Father Robert McTeague
is
a great book.
Well, I think it helps too to just have a decent handle on what your faith teaches, because
Yeah.
that helps you to
Yep.
think well.
To think
So
well.
then I could throw in a couple too.
Please.
You could look at the Dr. Burgwald's Apologetics column in the Bishop's Bulletin
Yes.
every week
There's
or
always
every
good
month.
reasoning in that column.
Yep. There was another, Catholic Answers Live on RPR Radio at 5 o'clock every day during the week. Those guys are great. You can learn a lot about, they have many logical arguments for the faith. And especially Jimmy Aiken is really fun to
But I
listen to.
would say even, so definitely with our faith, but even taking a step back we talk a lot about the 4 areas of formation as missionary discipleship. And I actually put thinking well, not under intellectual, not even under apostolic, how to engage with other people.
Okay.
I actually put it under human.
Oh, sure.
Like we need Merca. We need Merkins who can think well.
Yes.
To be a faithful citizen requires thinking. There's a lot of poor thinking
Yes.
In our society
Agreed.
today. And we just, even apart from, so being a missionary disciple in the sense of just being a human who makes a contribution to our communities, even apart from our faith, thinking well would be really, really, really important these days.
Yeah. Okay. I hope that people will email you and get those
Yeah.
resources.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll find a way to, I don't know, stick them in the next Apologetics column in the Bishop's Bulletin.
Maybe we'll,
or something. Maybe we can do something like that.
Maybe July's column
Yeah.
could be on, since we're recording this
Yeah.
in May.
Yeah.
Maybe July's column will
so
be
keep an
on.
eye out for that. And
Yeah.
maybe we'll put some of those resources in there so you can get them
So,
easily.
so we'll put this marker. Yeah. So July's Bishop's Bulletin, the column in the apologetics column topic will be on thinking well, and we'll give some resources and the additional resources online.
Yep. And that is the Does the Church Have an Answer?
Does the church have an answer?
page. So,
Yep.
all right. Thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Burgwald. It's always great having you here.
Happy to be here, Renee.
All right. Next week, my guest will be Father Sean Haggerty. He will be here to talk about the importance of fathers in our lives. He's also going to talk a little bit about how to teach your kids the faith, which is the feature for the June Bishop's Bulletin, which we interviewed him for. So we'll get a little bit more on that from him. All right, that's it for us today. Hope you'll join us again next week for more Catholic Views.